Hey everyone, welcome to our first Beyond the Pulpit podcast. We are so excited to be able to have conversations about those things you wouldn't talk about on a Sunday morning, whether it's because, you don't have enough time or, hey, it's a little controversial, it's a little uncomfortable. And I'm excited to have Pastor Gabe Rodriguez with us today. He's actually going to help host this podcast, but I kind of threw him for a little bit of a loop because I'm flipping the table on him.
Okay.
So now today you are the guest because I think it's going to be really important for those people as they go along this journey with us, as we develop this podcast together and we mature in what this is going to be like, that they know a little bit about yourself.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I know is that you've been a Jesus follower for a long time. You've been in the church for almost your entire life.
Yeah. I grew up
how
in
old
the
are you
church.
again?
I'm 33.
33 years old.
33.
You're a kid. You're a kid, buddy. You look like a kid. Look at your face.
I've always been told I have a baby face.
You do have a baby face.
That's why, you can't really see it much, but whatever beard is there is, what's keeping the 30 look.
Yeah. And so you've been in the church your entire life, right? But what I really want to know is what's kept you there, right? Because for me personally, I've experienced some traumatic stuff in and out of the church, emotional abuse from a family member. I've experienced things that, honestly could have broken me, but because of my faith, because of my deep roots and understanding of God's love for me, it kept me in the church. It kept me as a Jesus follower. But my question for you first to start, just a question, is kind of tell me a little bit about your childhood. Tell me a little bit about your embedded faith. What did that look like?
Yeah. So absolutely. I grew up in the church. I've heard people joke and say that, they had a drug problem. Their mom drug them to church on Tuesday.
Oh, that's such a churchy thing to say.
I know.
Oh, you're so
Come
churchy.
on. Yeah, that's
you're
why
so
I've
churchy.
been in church for that long that I know all of the church jokes.
Yeah.
But no, for real, I grew up in church my entire life and just
a church alive is worth the drive. Those things. Yeah. Sorry.
Buddy barrels and all these things.
The billboards.
Yeah.
Anyway,
all of it. But yeah, just growing up in a church. I grew up in the Assemblies of God denomination. So all the 16 fundamental truths. Actually, wasn't ordained licensed minister through them. I went to a Bible college out in Massachusetts, went there for a youth degree.
Did you grow up in like the Hispanic Assemblies of God church?
No,
was it,
no,
so tell me a little bit about that.
No, it wasn't the, Spanish church. We had longer services, but we didn't have the, 4 or 5 hour services with, a meal afterwards. Yeah. And then you come back an hour later for, an evening service. I was having a conversation with someone recently and we were talking just about our, childhood and what that was like. And I remember being a teenager and my parents actually switching churches, but I stayed at the one I was at.
As a teenager?
As a teenager. I went to church every Sunday, technically by myself at that church, and my parents went to a different church.
And what kept you at that church?
I think it was really the youth ministry. That pastor, that was the youth pastor there. He and I had a really, really good relationship. So much that there was times when I left my house in the middle of the night, crying, just trying to figure out what was going on. There's just so many.
So what you're saying is, even though you were a Jesus follower, your family had problems.
Oh, 100%.
There's this whole misconception, right? There's this whole thing that if you're following Jesus, then your life has to be perfect. You have no problems.
Oh, my goodness.
Especially when you grow up in the church, right? For me, sorry to cut you off, but we're just going to have to get used to this. I do that. Is for me, growing up in a charismatic church, and when I say growing up, really was around, 12 years old, 13 years old, not like a baby. My mom was Catholic. My dad was Jewish. So up until about 12 years old, when we actually found an independent, non-denominational, charismatic church, we weren't churched. But one of the things that is part of my embedded faith was, hey, if you have stuff going wrong in your life, it's probably because you're lacking some sort of belief in God, or you don't have enough faith. You don't have enough faith. You're not doing something right.
So it was your problem.
So you had problems.
Yes.
And you still loved Jesus growing up.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I did. There was times when I felt like maybe I was doing it wrong, even, being in a church, even being told you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Which is hard, being young, really, just because you grew up in a church doesn't mean that you've been a Christian your whole life. I would say I really started taking my faith more seriously in like my mid-teenage years.
Why did you start taking your faith more seriously?
I think it was because I had an encounter with God. And I think because of that encounter, it was something that felt so real that I hadn't really experienced before. You hear about it, you talk about it with other people, you see other people experience on a Sunday morning. The church I went to, there's people falling out on the floor everywhere. And you're like, is that real? Is that not real? Like, what are they experiencing?
But what's really important is that your church have those people that would carry this little cloth that they would lay over their legs. I never understood, because a lot of times they'd lay that cloth and they're wearing pants. So I didn't completely understand what they were trying to cover.
It's for the manifestations when you start rolling.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, this just got weird, but okay, we're starting off that way. But anyway, my question is, what then led you to get into ministry? Because you're licensed or ordained through the Assemblies of God.
Yeah, I do remember the day I became, I guess you can say my conversion date or whatever you want to call it. It was June 27th, 2005. And it was interesting because that was the same day that my niece was born. So I'll never forget that either. But I remember being in Brownsville, Assemblies of God in Pensacola. And we were there for a youth
By the
conference.
way, Pensacola is beautiful.
It is beautiful.
I wish Jesus would call me to Pensacola to pastor. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah. I wish we could be down there too. I'm sick of the snow. One of the services I remember was Pastor Benny Perez. He's
Pastor Benny. Church LV from Las Vegas.
Oh yeah. And I just remember being there in that sanctuary, and there's so much going on. I remember the conference being called Branded by Fire. And it
sounds a little scary.
Yeah. But yeah, I just remember being there, and at the end of the service, they had a time where it was like, do you want to have an experience with God? And I just remember growing up.
How old were you?
15. Yeah. I just remember growing up, going up and saying yes and responding to every altar call just because I wanted to be sure I was going to heaven. So, it was instilled in me to respond, but something was different that day.
Yeah.
I went up, and man, God just really started, just like things were breaking off of me, and I was feeling things I had never really experienced before. And that,
all right. So breaking off of me is like a churchy kind of way to say it. What does that mean? Breaking off, like an arm fell off? Like what does that mean? Breaking off of you?
I think as a teenager, there's a lot of things you're dealing with. There's a lot of insecurities, a lot of shame, a lot of guilt,
especially in the church world. Right. God forbid you thought a girl was cute, and then all of a sudden
that's why I went to youth group.
Yeah. But then you were sinning, right?
Yeah. And then you were sinning, and then there was, hand checks, make sure your hands are in the right place. And
keep room for the Holy Spirit.
Yep. Always. There has to be room. But being there
we're getting real vulnerable. We're getting real truthful today, buddy. Hopefully they'll edit some of this out.
That's what this is all for. Beyond the pulpit.
Yeah. Beyond the pulpit.
But yeah, when I say broken off, just the shame, the guilt, and just feeling new in a way, if that makes sense. You go up there and someone lays hands on you, and just you feel different. And that was also the same night. I feel like I was baptized in the Holy Spirit. I was speaking tongues, 15 years old. Continue to nurture that my entire the rest of my walk, but just through all of that in that time, just really feeling like there was something bigger than what I knew growing up.
Yeah, that's good.
Just being in church, going through the motions every single Sunday. You see the same people, you sit in the same section of your church, you have your same row. If you're not there, people know. It's church. It's if you're there long enough, it becomes a routine for you. And in that moment, it felt like all of that just changed. It was God touched my life in a way to where I felt, in a sense, whole.
The words that you were going through, the motions you were going through actually were real.
Yeah.
That the God that you were taught about,
Yeah.
the God that you had learned about was actually real. So
Yeah.
you had a moment where it was like, okay, everything that I've heard or talked about actually became real in this moment.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. And it was, I just remember being there and that night, just being like, God, this is what it's all about. You know, from that moment, I knew like things started, you know, dots like started connecting. You know, a lot of the things I had gone through, even, you know, youth pastors and even kids life teachers and whatever it may be, like all of those people have in their own way had those real, like encounters with God, and those encounters led them to be in a position where they were, whether it be, you know, youth pastoring or leading in a kids ministry. Because if you don't love the Lord, you know, it's the church being in ministry is just, it's not for you. And it's not for if you don't like people, that's a problem too. Because
Yeah, listen, I won't go there, but you know, sometimes, right? A lot of the people business, not just pastoring, social work and being in the medical field would be all a lot easier if there wasn't people involved.
Oh, yeah.
Right. But you said something that I think is really good, and I want us to pivot for a moment. Not that I don't want to hear more of what you have to say, but you know, you said that ministry, pretty much you were saying like ministry is tough. Yeah. Ministry can be ugly, and the church can be ugly.
Yeah.
There are things with it. And the reason the church can be ugly is the church is made up of people, and we are broken people. Right. Yeah. And one of the things that I remember so much was looking at people who have been serving God for a long time and going, how do you still do that with the brokenness in the church and out of the church? Right? I've had those moments.
Yeah.
God, if you're real, then why do I feel this way? God, if you're real, then why do I suffer with anxiety, depression, and irrational fear? God, if you're real, I mean, it was to the point where for me, 14 years old, tried to take my own life because the things that people had said about me, the things that close personal family member had said about me and had treated me, well, those things must be true. And so why am I even, what's the point of me being on this planet, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of brokenness. We're living in a really ugly world.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think the church needs to do better at is meeting people in that place. But like what you just said a little while, what I asked you a little while ago when you said was there was something different in that moment, right? That everything you've heard became real. Everything that you read about, became real. Now, fast forward a little bit in your story, because again, I kind of switched this on you. You're now the guest. Is you went to Bible college, to the Assemblies of God. You ended up becoming a youth pastor, I believe at like 19 years old, which is kind of strange. Yeah. Like a teenager leading teenagers.
Blind leading the blind.
The blind leading the blind. And we do that in the church world, right? All of a sudden we just
fake it until you make it.
It's okay, right? But anyway, sorry. But then there was a point where around 23 years old, you got married, if I remember your story correctly. And now you have this full-time gig in a thriving, growing church.
Yeah, the mega church, the big church.
Tell us a little bit about that. Tell me a little bit about that experience, because where I want to know is like, hey, you're here now. You're serving Jesus. You love Jesus. But I know, because I know you, that there were moments in your story that the ugliness of the church could have derailed you, but you're still here. And when I say the church, I don't necessarily mean the organization of the church. Let's not, I want to make sure that's really clear. I mean the people.
Yeah.
Right. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. After Bible college, went on staff at a church, and it was an incredible opportunity. Just, being fresh out of Bible college to go to a church that, has over 2,000 people, in Pennsylvania is just not typical, having little, I guess you could say little to no experience, aside from, just.
Well, you were 23 years old.
I was 23 years old. It was also my first year. My wife and I had just gotten married. She was transplanted from Maine to Pennsylvania. So that was all new. But really just being in that church, there was a lot of it where I felt like my life was being dictated by other people. And I would say, and because, I looked up to them so much, I was loyal to a fault.
Yeah.
Even to the point to where, in a sense where you feel like you might even be, abused in a way, but you just want to be loyal, and you're willing to take the punches just because you're trying to protect someone or protect, an image or whatever it may be. So being there, obviously everything's good. It's always, everything looks great at first, everything's great. And then once you start getting into the weeds and you start becoming more comfortable and the honeymoon phase is done, you start to really see what church is like. And then you really see that, people are humans, people are sinful, and there's, hurt people. And I know that's a churchy thing too, but it really is true. Saying if you're not able to process your own hurt and your own things, you're either going to transfer it or you're going to put it on someone else. Just because you need someone to, you're going to be someone's punching bag. Yeah.
I love what you said there. You said a few things. What I love is you acknowledged what you experienced, right? Which I think is really important.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, there was some pain I experienced. There was some sinful things that I participated in or experienced. But that is part of the brokenness of humanity.
Yeah.
Right. And I think one of the things that we endeavor to do, we really want to do, is acknowledge the pain that we all go through, acknowledge the challenges, both in and out of the church, acknowledge all of that, but know that we don't have to stay there. Right.
Yeah.
That there's healing in that, and there's healing through that, better said. And I love what you said also, like the pain that is not dealt with will be transmitted to the next generation, to other people, so forth and so on. And so you've had this experience, you've whether it's for you, it was being part of a church, but for other people that could be watching and listening, it could be with a family member, it could be with someone they worked with. It doesn't matter. But the question is, why, going real deep, really digging deep, better said, what has kept you still following Jesus? Because you had all these experiences, real life experiences.
Yeah.
Right? That could have derailed you.
Yeah. You just think back to the times when, you had those big moments and you remember where God really changed your life. And I think in those moments, you're reminded of what you came out of. And I think it's something that you have to constantly remind yourself of and go back to those times, because it's so easy to forget, what God's brought you through because you're so caught up in the moment of what you're dealing with in that time. And, you'll cry out to God and say, God, help me through this. Or honestly, sometimes you might not even cry out to God and you just might be angry and completely avoid him, because even being in Bible college, we kind of joked, but it was a real thing. But it was like Bible college is a place where you could fall away from Christ and you really might reject the church completely because you're challenging your theology. Yes. You're having conversations that would challenge things that you thought or believed. Got it. And even being taught in a sense to where some of the things that you're taught, you're being challenged, but you're also, it's almost like you're being hit over the head with the Bible. Mm-hmm. Take us back. I'm still trying to get us get you to the point where, like, what has kept you in the church? What has kept you there? Because it is easier, right? Yeah. I know you actually said it. You said, and then I appreciated that, right? It was those moments. Yeah. And one of the things that I
I used to do more often, and I don't do it as often, but I don't do as many weddings as I used to do, officiate as many weddings as I would have the couple on the last day of premarital. I would have them take a Post-it note and write down the things that attracted them to their spouse, the reasons why they're getting married. What are the good things? And then I would take those and I would incorporate it into the ceremony. And I would say, Sarah said about you, Bill, that you were, the reason that she's marrying you is because of this, and list those things out. And then Bill, Sarah, this is what Bill said about you. And this is why he's marrying you. And I would say in the ceremony, when things get tough, when life gets really hard, when marriage stinks, because there are times where marriage stinks. It's really, really challenging. It's really, really hard. Remind yourself of the reason why you're standing here today. And I think what I hear you saying is what's kept you in the faith is that moment in Brownsville, Pensacola, or Brownsville Church in Pensacola, Florida, sunny Florida, where you had an experience with God that, by the way, no one else can judge because it was your experience with God.
Yeah.
Right? It's the same thing with love. How do you know that you love somebody? No one can judge whether you love. You could say, well, your actions. Yeah. But it's something supernatural in you, right? Yeah. So you had this supernatural, this moment with God that has been foundational for you. Yeah. Right?
Even in that moment when, I think back to Brownsville, I think just even that experience and that encounter I had with God, and I was baptized in the Holy Spirit, through that, the Holy Spirit really does lead you and guide you. And he really does, he never leaves you. So I think in those times where you really doubt, really question, there's something always there. And sometimes you might think it's your conscience, or maybe just something you've heard in the past, you just bring back to memory. But it might just be like, hey, I'm still here. I still care about you. And it's like, as soon as you tap into it, and as soon as you acknowledge it, it's like, okay, things just start becoming easier, or you might be enlightened in a different way to where it's like you're able to address things differently, or you might even just be encouraged. Like the Holy Spirit encourages you. And just through all of that. And I think it's just, not only is it just those experiences, but God does send people that can really encourage you and do and help lead you and guide you. And I've been so thankful to have many people that have done that for me. But there's also been many that have also really hurt me. Points to where I hadn't spoken to pastors for years because they had done something and threatened to call the cops on me and all this stuff. And
sounds like another podcast for another day. Yeah. I was thinking about when you were talking about the other day, we were having a conversation with my youngest about something. And she said something to the effect of, why does all bad things happen to us? And we're like, what are you talking about? She's like, all bad things happen to us. And it was just a great opportunity in that moment to acknowledge that what she was experiencing and what she was feeling stunk. Yeah. It wasn't a happy moment. But that even though she experiences those things, or we experience yucky things in life, ugly things in life, that we don't have to stay there. Yeah. And that there's a God that meets us in those moments, right? It's what the Psalms are all about. And David and the things that he had to experience, and Joseph, and we can go hero after hero after hero, and you go, after they experience those things, how do they still serve God? Yeah. Because they recognize that God was with them through the whole thing. Yeah. And one of the things that I really, the vision for these conversations, because honestly, the title of the podcast is Beyond the Pulpit, but really it's about conversations of real things with real people, about the experiences that they're having, and also other great things, strategy and leadership and all those things. We're going to talk about that. Then the next podcast, we're going to have a conversation with Pastor Chris Irwin from Church of the Highlands and talk to him about leadership and stuff like that. So it's going to be all over the place that we're going to talk, but hopefully good. But again, the the purpose of it is to be able to have conversations that we couldn't have on a Sunday, on a Sunday morning, and really dig into those areas. And what I loved about our conversation that we had today was that this is someone that they're going to hear a lot about on this podcast, meaning they're going to see you a lot. You're going to be interviewing people. But I think it's important that they understand your story and that you've experienced some hurt and you've experienced things in the church and out of the church. You know, one of my favorite characters in the Bible, which kind of was brought in my mind as we were talking, was Joseph, right? And how from the pit to the palace, and just the story of reconciliation, a story of how he could experience like really crappy stuff in life, but ultimately still serve God. And so that's what I really appreciated about our time together. You know, we're going to try to keep this under 30 minutes, you know, these conversations, but I really appreciate you having this conversation. You actually didn't know that this was going to happen. You had come in with this whole other idea thinking that you were going to host this, and I flipped the script on you. And so I apologize. You're a champ. You did it well. And I think it's so important that those people that are going to see you quite often on this podcast, you and I will be doing this together, but quite often they know a little more about you and a little more about your story. And so tell me one thing as we kind of wrap this up. Tell me, what is the most exciting, let me rephrase that. What is the thing that you are looking forward to the most with this podcast?
I'd say definitely, you know, sometimes even in our lives, we go through moments and we don't understand why that's happening. But then years pass and you're like, maybe God put you through that moment so that way you could help someone else in that moment. And I know that some of the experiences I've had, and things that we'll even talk on this podcast, you know, other people, things that we'll dive into, your life and your experience. But there's things that, you know, there's people watching and listening right now that they're going through this stuff and they might not feel comfortable enough to talk about it on a Sunday. And hopefully that these conversations allow people to feel more comfortable, to maybe be more vulnerable, because we do live in a society that doesn't communicate well, and we hold things in and we brush it under the rug, and it festers, and then years down the line, you know, there's moral failures, there's all these things that happen, and just you know, trauma. Divorces and trauma, and it's just because it's unaddressed. You know,
it's unaddressed hurt, and addressing that, but not only just, you know, church hurt, because we could talk about that forever, but, you know, God's doing things in people's lives, and just being able to explore that and to go through the wins that people have gone through, and just be vulnerable and open. You know, we have great times, we have some tough times, but through it all, God's faithful, and that we're going to be able to really just share truthful and honest and unscripted, essentially, conversations with each other. Yeah, no, I'm really excited about it too. I think it's going to be a great opportunity for us to have critical conversations about the things that people are talking about and maybe struggling with, definitely struggling with, in a safe place. Right. My hope is that every time we gather, we have a conversation that someone goes, wow, that's something I experienced, and I'm glad they talked about it. And now they made me feel that I can talk about it. Right. There's a pastor up there, there's this, and they're talking about it. I can talk about it, because I think one of the things, I'll end with this. One of the things that is so important is that the church, the body of believers in Jesus Christ is a safe place for people to challenge their faith, to talk about the things they're struggling with. Sadly, too many people are leaving the church to deal with their church hurt and their struggles, instead of the church being the safe place to have that conversation. And so my hope is that that's this place. And so we're excited.
It's exciting.
I'm excited. Everybody's excited. And so that's it. Beyond the Pulpit.